It's late July of the year 1570. Lord Oda Nobunaga resumes his campaign around Lake Biwa, besieging one of his opponent's castles. All seems to be proceeding as planned, but the calm night is set into upheaval as one of his scouts bursts into the Lord's tent. An entire army was seen crossing the river less than an hour's march to the north. Nobunaga immediately rose to his feet and began yelling orders. Battle was on the horizon. It's early summer of the year 1561. While the three powerful Hojo, Takeda, and Uesugi clans of eastern Japan struggle to gain a dominant position in the region, their western and still relatively minor neighbor, Lord Oda Nobunaga of Owari Province, makes efforts to capitalize on his stunning victory less than a year earlier against the Anegawa clan. Of course, the weakened Anegawa didn't just evaporate in the wake of the battle, still being a force to be reckoned with, but the great victory near Okahazama gave Nobunaga some respite, which he used wisely. Lord Oda allied himself with the former retainer of the Anegawa, a skilled youngster from the Matsudaira family, who notably soon changed his name to Tokugawa Ieyasu, and also managed to establish a good relationship with the famous Takeda Shingen of Kai. These political measures enabled Nobunaga to focus on his northern neighbor, the Saito clan. It was a smart yet expected decision, as the local lord who was hostile towards Nobunaga recently died, most likely of leprosy, and the Mino province became a staging ground of a classic power vacuum. In the course of the next 6 years, Oda campaigned in Mino, killing those who dared to oppose the invaders and further bribed others to his side. Eventually, in September 1567, the capital Inabayama Castle fell after a 2-week-long siege, and the conquest of Mino was mostly complete. The Inabayama Castle soon became known as Gifu Castle and was considerably renovated and enlarged. From that point on, it served as Nobunaga's main headquarters and primary base of operation. Oda's power grew steadily over the decade, as Nobunaga exercised control over 2 relatively small but very populous and fertile provinces lying in strategic positions in central Japan, not far away from Kyoto. Coincidentally, not long after Mino fell into Nobunaga's hands, an expected guest arrived at Gifu Castle. Ashikaga Yoshiaki, brother of the late shogun Ashikaga Yoshiteru, murdered 2 years earlier, wandered across Japan in search for a daimyo powerful enough to back his cause and champion Yoshiaki's claim to become the next shogun. In fact, Nobunaga expressed interest a year before, but being still checked by the Saito clan, it was not until next year that he was finally able to put things in motion. In 1568, Lord Oda launched a campaign west, plowed through the clans of Ise and Omi provinces, defeating them or forcing them to retreat. In November of that year, Oda's forces reached Kyoto, and Ashikaga Yoshiaki was installed as the 15th shogun of the Ashikaga Bakufu. It was an opportune situation for Nobunaga, who naturally became the power behind the throne and endeavored to impose his authority over adjacent provinces, skillfully exploiting his favorable position. In early 1570, at the hands of Yoshiaki, Nobunaga requested all local daimyo to attend a feast in Kyoto and swear allegiance to the incumbent shogun. It was probably an attempt to judge any possible opposition in the area, and it worked well. Lord Asakura of Echizen province was aware who was pulling the strings in Kyoto and refused to come along, distrusting Nobunaga's schemes. Asakura's denial was a convenient excuse for Lord Oda to prepare a military campaign and take control of Echizen province. In late May, a sizable army of 30,000 men left Kyoto and marched north along the west bank of Lake Biwa, eventually reaching Echizen by the end of the month. 2 Asakura castles were quickly stormed and taken, forcing the disobedient daimyo to retreat northwards. A mere day later, when Oda's troops foraged the nearby countryside, startling news reached Nobunaga's field headquarters. his brother-in-law, Azai Nagamasa, had betrayed him and was gathering troops to the south to help Asakura. Though Nobunaga initially didn't trust the reports, this supposed treason actually made sense, as both Azai and Asakura were old allies, and it was only recently that Nobunaga married his sister to Lord Azai, thus obtaining a new henchman. Anyway, in the blink of an eye, the odds turned against Nobunaga. Though the Echizen campaign went relatively smoothly, he couldn't ignore an unexpected enemy to the south and risk getting pincered between them. Having no other choice, Oda's army rushed back to Kyoto, avoiding unnecessary losses and garrisoning the nearby castles while on the go. But this was not the end of the bad news. The Rokaku clan, defeated by Nobunaga 2 years earlier, incited a revolt in southern Omi and threatened the integrity of Oda's holdings. Fearing that he would be cut off from his power base in Mino and Owari, Nobunaga departed the capital, marching back west. It soon turned out to be a risky maneuver, as combined Asakura and Azai forces were said to be moving south to cut off Nobunaga from his homelands. The situation looked dire as Oda's troops were once again clamped between two hostile armies. But luckily, the forced march allowed them to barely slip past danger and reach the safety of Gifu Castle just ahead of their enemies. The Azai and Asakura forces pillaged the Omi-Mino border, but having little to gain apart from that, as a bold attack on a fortified Oda stronghold was hardly an option, they eventually retreated. For the next couple of weeks, Nobunaga's army stalled at Gifu, but Lord Oda didn't stay idle. He requested help from Tokugawa Ieyasu and the shogun, bribed enemy units garrisoning the mountaintop castles in the narrow passage of the Mino-Omi border, while one of his detachments was left behind to deal with the disobedient Rokaku clan south of Lake Biwa. By late July, the campaign started up once more. But this time, Nobunaga didn't march straight to Echizen, but instead besieged Odani Castle, the main stronghold of the rebelling Azai clan. The surrounding town was set ablaze, but the fortress stood strong. Nobunaga expected reinforcements from the shogun and Tokugawa, but as neither showed up, he realized that he couldn't take Odani by himself, and the very next day diverted southeast to besiege the nearby Yokoyama Castle instead. His reasoning was fairly simple, as capturing Yokoyama would at least ensure that his old holdings in Mino and Owari would remain connected to his new ones around Kyoto. Oda forces surrounded the castle, while Nobunaga pitched a tent on a nearby hillside. Soon the reports came in that the joined Azai and Asakura troops had set a camp some kilometers to the north, aiming to relieve the besieged Yokoyama. Nobunaga quickly ordered his men to deploy on the field and prepare for an upcoming attack. But a couple of days passed and there was no sight of the approaching enemy. Eventually, scouts reported that the Azai and Asakura were seen abandoning their position and marching back north. Coincidentally, the long-awaited Tokugawa contingent finally arrived, reinforcing Oda's force with 5,000 men. Feeling secure, Nobunaga resumed the siege, positioning his units back around the castle. The sun set behind the mountains and night fell. But this was not a peaceful night for Nobunaga. Just before dawn, scouts reported that the enemy was seen crossing the Kusano River. In that very moment, Nobunaga realized that he had been fooled. The Azai and Asakura feigned a retreat for Oda to redeploy his troops around Yokoyama Castle, busying himself with the siege. Now they were marching to attack an unprepared enemy and use the castle's garrison to pincer Nobunaga's troops. Lord Oda had to think and act fast. He sent Tokugawa's contingent, supported by some of his own units, northwest to attempt to waylay Asakura's troops from crossing the Anegawa River. Meanwhile, Nobunaga marched his own men due north to engage the Azai and prevent his forces from being caught in the rear. Soon, battle ensued on both fronts. Tokugawa's vanguard had a tough time stopping the Asakura, but eventually Ieyasu and his retainers caught up, leveling the fight and slowly pushed the enemy back, denying them a foothold on the southern bank. On the eastern flank, Nobunaga was far less lucky, as the hastily assembled units were outnumbered by the Azai and lost many men trying to hold their ground. Blades splintered, sword guards were cleft in two. On all sides, each soldier fought for all their worth. Nobunaga's guard fought valiantly, somehow enduring up to the moment when late reinforcements finally began to arrive on the battlefield, and at least temporarily stabilized the situation. Concurrently, Ieyasu's side was clearly winning the bout, forcing Asakura to retreat to avoid further losses. His units soon began regrouping with the intention of falling on the right flank of the Azai. But Nobunaga's wing was steadily complemented by latecomers, and despite the initial knockback, they managed to overcome the enemy. Seeing that he was now alone and outnumbered, Lord Azai, now facing clearly unfavorable odds, commanded a general retreat of his troops. Both Oda and Tokugawa men pursued the enemy, dealing further casualties, until they stopped at the line of the Kusano River. Though the battle was hotly contested and lasted for a good part of the morning, both sides conceded relatively minor losses. Despite being surprised by the sudden attack, Nobunaga emerged victorious, and having proved that he was not inferior to any leading daimyo of medieval Japan. Yet the clash at the fords of the Anegawa River didn't cripple the military power of both Asakura and Azai clans, and that lack of a decisive blow complicated Oda's situation in central Japan, haunting Nobunaga for the next 3 years.